Welcome to Nurture the Soul. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl A. Lindsay, Minister for Worship and Theology for the United Church of Christ, and your host today. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar series that provides our local churches and faith practitioners with a multitude of practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources to engage with the critical topics facing our communities today. This webinar centers curiosity and care towards the collective liberation for all God's creation. We feature guest theologians, preachers, authors, community members, cultural artists, and thought leaders to delve deeply into topics that help us live into a gospel for such a time as this. Beloved, in hope, we offer this as a space for connection that cultivates a curious and loving community because we believe these are key in the journey alongside our still speaking God. Join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time for Nurture the Soul. And from time to time, look for special offerings. You can find a full list of upcoming digital program offerings at ucc.org/events or any of our social media platforms. View the complete Nurture the Soul collection on the United Church of Christ YouTube playlist. Those who register for the webinar will also receive a follow-up email with the link to today's recording. Friends, if these conversations move you, if what's offered here helps to enhance your ministry or nurtures your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. These small tokens have huge impacts in helping us resource you and your community in innovative and engaging ways. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for being with us today. During today's conversation, you can use the chat to say hello and shout out your location, and use the Q&A feature to ask our guest a specific question. And now, without further ado, I invite you to enjoy the second in a series of 3 conversations. Moderating these conversations is Dr. Julia M. Speller, Professor Emerita in American Religion, History, and Culture at Chicago Theological Seminary. Reverend Dr. Henry Simmons joins Dr. Speller today. Dr. Simmons was ordained by the United Church of Christ in 1974 and has served local churches in Washington, D.C. and Detroit before being elected Secretary for Ethnic and Minority Church Development with the United Church Board for Homeland Ministries. Mother Duck, for those of you who've been following the series, will rejoin us next week, as will Reverend Ellie Hutchinson, who has been our host. Without further ado, Dr. Speller, I turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Last week, we heard testimonies from elders of the Afro-Christian tradition on the role that dignity played in the nurture of their souls. In those reflections, they shared accounts of the disrespect and dishonor they experienced from the practices and perspectives of the Jim Crow system. But we learned that the Afro-Christian church offered a safe and empowering space to build hope and resistance in the midst of an unjust world. It was the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because you are. Since you are, therefore I am, that nurtured their souls and fortified their sense of dignity and self-worth. Today, we will continue the conversation by adding another value of Ubuntu, and that is compassion. Today, I'm going to use several slides. First slide. Compassion, by definition, is the emotional desire to help others that can lead to actions of comfort and relief. In Latin, it literally means to suffer and struggle together, suggesting an even deeper form of care. Too often, the response to distress in this world is judgment of others, producing pity and disdain rather than compassion. This creates actions that negate the humanity of others and prevent the possibility of shared struggle and healing. Next slide. The story of the Afro-Christians reveal many examples of failed compassion shaped by injustice. But the spirit of Ubuntu redirected their gaze away from the pity and disdain of the world toward the power of their ancestors. They blended their Africanity with Christianity by affirming traditional communal ties and embracing the radical compassion of Jesus Christ for all humanity. This empowered them to suffer and struggle together, bringing healing, resistance, and the power to restore healing. End slides. So today we're going to engage in a few questions and a little bantering between myself and Henry about the first topic of compassion. As we worked on the book, Henry, we discovered that many of our church documents use the term Negro work to describe a separate form of ministry for Black congregations. Can you share your thoughts on how this can be seen as an example of substituting pity and disdain for genuine compassion?
Yes, and I'm pleased to be here again today and to be led by you, Julia. One of the downsides of the ability, or let's say the movement for folk to kind of work together and struggle together, is when one party is not accorded the kind of dignity and respect that they deserve. And so, for much of the work that predominantly white denominations did in the wake, say, of the Civil War and emancipation, uh, Black folk were pretty much dealt with as objects of mission. In other words, they were those who were to be, quote unquote, saved and to be elevated to personhood in terms of how they are to relate. And part of that mindset, Julia, comes from a lack of understanding that people of African ancestry did not discover, nor were they bequeathed humanity on the shores of the Western world. That our ancestors were part of long-standing, centuries-old traditions and cultures that pretty much held all of life as sacred. There was no bifurcation. And so when the work, quote unquote, referred to was that amongst Negroes, it did not have the kind of genuine compassion and concern that one would link with, say, the compassion of Jesus. It is interesting as we study the Afro-Christian Convention that the Afro-Christian Church in its early years also engaged in missionary work. They had missionaries in Africa and South America, particularly in Guyana, and one would assume that their missionary work was done from another angle with another perspective, particularly as they were dealing with kindred in the African diaspora. So their work was not seen as something of having pity on these poor backward folk in Africa or in other parts of the African diaspora, but as persons who were equal in terms of demanding and meriting dignity and respect. And so the compassion was made evident in how they related to one another. This question also cannot really be addressed apart from understanding how all persons of African ancestry had to wrestle with how to not only survive, but thrive in an atmosphere, in an environment that defined them as nobodies. And so, in order to have genuine compassion, one must be able to see the somebodyness in those who, with whom they are in mutual struggle. So this missionary mindset tended to make persons of African ancestry less than capable, less than competent, less than able to work with and embrace themselves. Uh, Let me end by this little section by just saying, reciting an African proverb, which says the best way to fight an alien and oppressive culture is to embrace your own. And what the Afro-Christian convention was about was this kind of resistance to an oppressive culture by doubling down and embracing their own, by showing compassion, love of self, but also love of others in that common struggle. So there wasn't a two-tier kind of relationship. It was a relationship based on mutual respect and mutual compassion. And again, they maintained the label of Afro-Christian, which indicates they were neither ashamed nor apologetic about who they were, who they would always be, and that their somebodyness did not come from those outside of that whole African diaspora who would relate to them as less.
That's an interesting response. I'm wondering if it's even possible, was it even possible for the church leaders to even begin to think about sharing in struggle and suffering with the African churches, the Black churches? Was there any? You think there was any space in between there where something could have happened?
I think it could have happened uh, had it not been for the fact that the very presence of Africans in America was based on a construct of race that did not exist before the 15th, 16th century. In other words, persons of African ancestry were, for example, even in the Constitution, the founding documents of this nation were defined as three-fifths human. And so if you are an individual who views oneself as whole, as entitled, and so forth, there's very little that could initially be felt in terms of shared struggle. Mm-hmm. But it is also to be noted that in the United Church of Christ, in our history and roots and so forth, there were those who had more than just pity, but had a genuine sympathy, genuine spirit of empathy with persons who were formerly enslaved. Hence, the work of the American Missionary Association, Also, the assistance that the Afro-Christians were given by the larger Christian church, even in the establishment of the Franklinton Christian College. All of that indicates that there are kindred hearts and minds. Now, it should be noted that that kind of relationship building based on genuine compassion that is a response to mutual respect could not be done purely intellectually.
Mhm.
That space had to be shared, that persons had to go into the areas where those who had been historically and perennially defined as less than were. Now, the other side of that, though, is the expectation too often with this kind of mindset was that the people of African ancestry had to conform to, or in many ways assimilate themselves to the majority society, so that what was rich in their traditions were often looked at as not being as significant as the other works. Quick example, the richness of the Negro spiritual that arose out of that sense of struggle and faith of enslaved Africans was not viewed as artistically valuable, say, as the music of the early European masters. So that Bach, Beethoven, Haydn, all of those were deemed as the persons who were able artistically and musically to express the essence of the Christian faith. And yet, out of the struggle of Africans who were enslaved, who had their faith tested on these shores, came what is called the Negro spiritual. You know, nobody knows the trouble I see. Nobody knows but Jesus. And instead of ending that song with a woe is me, I'm nobody note, they ended it with a note of victory, glory, hallelujah. That is a part of what this resistance is rooted in.
Mhm.
This indomitable faith that no matter what is around us, no matter what we are in, it is possible to still celebrate the goodness, the majesty, the might of God, even if we don't do it with pipe organs and with anthems.
Yeah. What's clear here is that there's an inability of the church leaders to admit a shared humanity. There was
Right.
no way that they were able to admit and embrace the fact that it was par. It was on par in terms of humanity and sense of who we are.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There was no way to, unless you are sharing space and
Mhm.
unless you are willing to give credence to the authenticity of another's story,
Yeah.
that it's possible for others to have their own stories, their own faith hammered out on the anvil of experience, and that story is as legitimate as other stories in proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a difference between the hierarchical nature of the Western church and the communal nature of the African experience. And of course, being in America with rugged individualism and, I got mine, you get yours, that whole attitude, there was really no space for there to be a genuine expression or experience of compassion that could share struggle, because the humanity was not understood as equally on par. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And because the people, our forebears in the Afro-Christian Convention understood that they not only had to uh, embrace faith as a kind of social or whatever responsibility or tradition, but they had to embrace their faith as a matter of survival, as a matter of self-definition. And so they did not see, let me put it this way, they saw themselves as part of humanity, but they were not willing either to demean or degrade their sense of rootedness, a sense that they were to embrace who they were by God's, creation and so forth.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next slide. Thank you for that response. Between 1740 and 1834, anti-literacy laws were passed by the United States, making it illegal for enslaved Africans to learn to read. The fear was that literacy would empower them to rebel, escape, and resist through acts of violence. So those who transgressed the laws were severely punished and sometimes killed. But in reality, the very act of denying education became fuel that fortified their collective struggle to claim dignity in their fight for justice. Next slide. While the Afro-Christian Convention recognized the close connection between education and true freedom, there was only minimal support at times from the Christian church. Consequently, education was one of the first issues addressed by the convention in their early years. Inspired by the spirit of Ubuntu, Afro-Christians began by offering basic education for men, women, and children, then expanded it to include training for clergy and lay leaders. This was all in an effort to equip the church for a ministry of radical compassion strengthened by resistance and restoration. Let's stop slide. In your testimony last week, Henry, you shared and spoke about the impact of the Franklinton Center at Bricks and the impact it had on your life and ministry. Could you take a few minutes and give us a little highlight some background about the story of Franklinton College, that whole story behind that very interesting backstory? Can you share some pieces of that, please?
Yes, I would be glad to. Franklinton Christian College, by the way, if you want to get a more fulsome look at what we are talking about, this is the excellent book that we have produced on the Afro-Christian Convention, the fifth stream of the UCC. Franklinton Christian College was founded in 1871. It was a result of the movement that had begun to sweep particularly the southern and formerly areas of former enslavement, just 6 years or so after the end of the Civil War. It was notable that both those in the Christian church, but also in the Congregational church through the work of the American Missionary Association, felt that the response to the freed persons, freed men as they were called, that would make the greatest difference in their overcoming the barriers, the hindrances that being enslaved would bring was through education. And it was not lost on persons of African ancestry, the newly manumitted, that if education was so insignificant and irrelevant, why were attempts to be formally educated so bitterly met and resisted? And so it was kind of a thing where, okay, if this is bad for us, then maybe we need to go get it because this is it. And what education did, and what it does even today, is provide access to places, to spaces that one would not have access to without at least that kind of academic credentialing. And so the Afro-Christian Convention, the early leaders said that we need a college, we need a place where our folk, both lay folk and clergy and the community around, could be accorded this valuable asset. And so they founded a school in Franklinton, North Carolina, and it met in the first Christian church of Franklinton, which was a Black or Afro-Christian church for many years, with some assistance from the wider Christian church. They were able to construct some buildings, to construct a campus in Franklinton, North Carolina, that became the Franklinton Christian College. It was later certified as by the state of North Carolina as being able to, as offering the kind of education and curriculum and so forth that others would. Also, it was a pillar in that community, in that area, that rural area, where not only was it instrumental in building and creating teachers and all, but of supporting the sense of dignity, the sense of ability to achieve and to be on one's own. The college closed in 1930 as part of a response to the Great Depression and so forth, and remained closed until I think about 10, 16 years or so later, when it really was taken over by the Afro-Christian Convention to become a camping place, but also continuing Christian education and empowerment and equipping workers of the church. The interesting part about the Franklinton Christian College is that it was initially funded by members of the Afro-Christian Convention, assessing themselves 10 cents per member, which shows a dedication to not simply be, as I referred to earlier, objects of mission, but to be partners in mission and proponents of mission. That was not an unusual spirit. It should be noted that early Black churches were able to respond to denials of certain signs of respect by forming, for example, mutual aid societies that accorded African Americans and Christians an opportunity to have decent burials. And some of those mutual aid societies eventually evolved into some of the early Black-owned insurance companies, life insurance companies. So there was this great spirit of saying, not only do we, as a people, deserve high regard and high respect, but that we also care about the conditions, not just of individuals, but of our community, of our, uh, you know, broader congregations and uh, schools and so forth. So it was remarkable that we're still seeking to do that today with Franklinton Center, that it can be and is and has served as a place for that kind of empowerment and liberation and a place that embraces all who would seek to do justice. So Franklinton Christian College closed in 1930. Eventually, Franklinton Center was incorporated in 1946. And in 1954, it opened and moved and opened in the Whitakers community, the site of the former brick school that was begun and supported by the American Missionary Association with a gift from the Julia Brick family.
Yeah, this is an excellent example of Ubuntu. I mean, clear and simple. Starting with basic education for children, men and women, and then moving forward. And as a layperson, I'm always happy to hear that laity was also considered as a viable part of that story, of that mix. Very much so. And as you tell the story, there's this long continuation. Although it ended in 1930 because of the Depression, et cetera, that it kept changing and morphing and recreating itself to meet the needs of those in the community. So it's a wonderful, wonderful story of self-determination, and one that looks to the future, not simply looking at the past, but continuing toward the future for sure.
Right. And that's what, in fact, was so powerful about its impact on the lives of persons such as myself and Mother Delk and others in our youth. The persons who worked with Franklinton Center at Bricks, the J.T. Stanley and Judson King and Purcell Austin and a number of other lay folk who were part of the Afro-Christian Convention and the Convention of the South had this remarkable ability to see in us young people what we could and should become. Their goal was to help us to understand that we need not conform to derisive definitions of who we were, but that there was something within all of us that enabled us to look ahead to a brighter future. to a future of leadership, to a future of not just surviving, but thriving. But they also saw within each of us the potential to transform the world, the potential to be instruments of liberation, to be those who would be the advocates and activists on behalf of justice in the world. And so one of the things about Franklinton Center at Bricks, which was a continuation of that spirit of the original Franklinton Christian College, was that we were viewed as those who should understand that there's no bifurcation between our growth and life as Christians and our involvement with movements for justice. And particularly in the 60s and 70s, where the whole nation, if not the world, was swept up in the civil rights movement, and where there was a spirit that said that oppression, Jim Crow, all of that could and should be resisted, and that those who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ have a seminal role in that movement. So it's a magical place because of that, but also because of the fact that the spirit of Ubuntu leads us and guides us and serves as a foundation upon which oppressed people, and particularly those displaced from their native lands, could move and grow.
Now, clearly, this whole story about the Franklinton Center and the whole evolution has been formative for you and other folks who were in the Afro-Christian church. And I'm wondering, what would you say how would you describe or articulate the gifts and opportunities that the center now offers to the wider UCC family and even beyond? Certainly, it is centered on the Afro-Christian churches, but there's so much potential. What do you see there that might be able to help the denomination more broadly to move forward?
Okay, well, of course, there is this spirit that what we as the board and the staff seek to do now, and the council of elders, is to offer exposure to this spirit, a spirit of life-giving, of healing. It's a sacred space. It is spacious. We have a little over 240 some odd acres of fertile farmland. And one of the things that we're seeking to do now is to operate our mission, which is to be this place where all life is sacred, where justice and liberation are not only proclaimed but embraced, is to operate our mission through 4 pillars. And I think that the wider UCC, as well as other community groups or other non-government organizations, would benefit from. The first pillar is African American history preservation. A part of that is now being made real through the citing, the placement of the Afro-Christian archives on the grounds of Franklinton Center at Bricks, so that we will be able to recognize that rich legacy and to begin to collect the papers and so forth of other seminal leaders in the Afro-Christian Convention. And that archive is important because of the recognition now for the last several years of the Afro-Christian Convention as the fifth stream of the United Church of Christ. So it can be a place for research, but also a place where young people can come and begin to see that they, in fact, have roots in justice and in faith-based liberation work. The second pillar is that of community education and economic development. We, again, continue to subscribe to the notion that all persons ought to be able to be empowered, equipped, and inspired to use what they have learned and experienced in the struggle for peace with justice. And so, for example, during the pandemic a couple years ago, when we were not permitted by the state of North Carolina, like many places, to host groups and so forth. Under the leadership of the then executive director, Vivian Lucas, we said, but that shouldn't stop the mission. The pandemic doesn't stop the mission of the center. So one of the responses we made, given the setting, that community, which is one of the poorest economically communities or counties in North Carolina, was to expand our broadband so that the campus technically became a drive-up internet cafe to serve persons in the community, particularly students who didn't have access to broadband to continue their education virtually. We partnered with one of the public school systems, with Edgecombe County Public Schools, to offer learning pods. And so that school system would bring about 40 young people per day to the campus in order to be able to do their schoolwork and to conduct their business that way. So that's community outreach. We also converted 16 acres of our land to a community vegetable garden. And there's also an orchard on the property. And we were able to, from our own efforts, produce over 19,000 pounds of fresh vegetables and fruit for persons in the community to come. It's interesting that even though that is farming, agricultural area, it is also a food desert. There are no significant full service food markets within 11, 12 miles of the center. And so that was about community development. In its history, we should know that when the former Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ had its Southern field office on the campus, that was a time where there was a lot of work done with Black farmers to begin to help them gain access to federal funds that were long denied and are probably going to be denied now in this crazy environment. But efforts to form a farmers cooperative. So we're seeking to establish those kind of relationships again. Also, in terms of the wider community, Many may know or may not know that the environmental racism, the environmental justice movement began there on the campus of Franklinton Center under the leadership of the Reverend Leon White, who was the um, field office director, and Miss Dolly Burwell, who was on the board of the center when they moved into Warren County to prevent the dumping of toxic uh, elements, soil and so forth, in that predominantly Black community. So what we are seeking to do now is to continue to reach out to that community and to partner with others, with school systems and so forth, in order to deal with the disparities and inequities of education and economics. The third pillar, of course, is what we call innovative land use. That means we're trying to figure out and have begun some efforts to discern what do we do with 250 some odd acres of land? Mm-hmm. How does that fit into our efforts with environmental justice? How does that fit into our efforts at helping to sustain, if not to increase the economic viability of that area? We're amongst the largest landowners in Edgecombe County. But finally, our fourth pillar is to continue operating as a social justice conference and retreat center. And this is where we invite organizations in the UCC, churches, and other organizations to come for retreats, to come for planning sessions, to come for an opportunity to strategize and to be mobilized for the ongoing struggle for justice, particularly in this time of fierce urgency around not only the protection of rights, but the expansion of rights. So we have that space, and it is a welcoming space. In its early days, in the 50s and 60s, the center was one of the few places, not only in North Carolina, but in the Deep South, where multicultural, multiracial groups could gather and feel protected and safe, where persons, even in our most recent days of struggle, where oppressed communities, forgotten communities, those for whom no compassion is shown, particularly now the LGBTQ and communities, all of that now is welcome and has been welcome at our center. It is a place to come to embrace, as I said earlier, justice. One of the things I want to say about the center, since I'm chair of the board and you asked, what makes it so special? There is, on one side of the ground, a huge magnolia tree. That tree was planted, I guess, some 30 years or so ago, when Reverend Dr. Bernice Powell Jackson was the executive director of the Commission for Racial Justice and then with the Justice and Witness Ministry. The magnolia tree was planted at the site where it is reasoned the whipping post stood to help break the unruly, quote unquote, slaves that were there when that was a plantation. And it specialized in being the plantation where the most resistant, recalcitrant slaves were broken before they could be sold to other plantations. The magnolia tree, ironically, was a symbol or a sign for stops on the Underground Railroad, so that those slaves fleeing and seeking to go north could, by way of certain magnolia trees and by way of creative quilts hung on clotheslines or whatever, find their way to freedom. And so the tree was planted there at a site of dehumanization, of horror, of terror, to say that now this land has become a place of liberation, of calm, of peace, of justice, where healing from the wounds inflicted by an unjust world can take place. So we invite you to come wherever you may be and join other organizations who have found in that sacred space a special place and who have caught the spirit of the ancestors who are there. Final piece about the center is there is also what we call a freedom walkway that was begun several years ago. And on that freedom walkway, there are bricks, commemorative bricks for individuals, churches, and so forth, who've been supportive of the center, friends of justice, that we seek to memorialize there, and we offer opportunities for those bricks to be purchased and placed there. The important thing, the significant thing about that Freedom Walkway is that there are about 60 bricks in honor of the former enslaved persons on the ground. And what is so touching and moving about that is that a former member of the board and now returning member of the board, Mr. Jim Wren, who lives in the area, did the research to find out who were the former slaves. And he found the information at the Register of Deeds under property, not under people, but property. Some of those 60 persons didn't have names. They were only described by their gender and approximate age. Now, I say that because that undergirds the marriage between dignity and compassion that eventuates in justice. That where there is no dignity felt and accorded, then the likelihood of there being compassion shown is almost nil. You do not love that which you do not first respect. And what the Afro-Christians were about was garnering that kind of respect for themselves and for their capacity to be and to do things far beyond what their environment said. And so it is to that spirit of Ubuntu, of compassion, which is always other directed. It is always demonstrated in acts of support and care and so forth, not of pity and disdain. but in ways that truly empower others, that we invite individuals to come to Franklinton Center at Bricks. And it's a wonderful gift to our church and to our world, in fact.
Thank you so much for that wonderful and empowering story, and particularly during this time when hope is needed so desperately. In terms of in such a time like this, I know the ancestors are clearly smiling on us at this point. They really are. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Well, the goal for our conversation today was to strip away the sentimental feeling about compassion and look at it from the more radical nature. I think that was accomplished today. Next week, we're going to conclude the series as we consider co-responsibility as the final link that brings together dignity and compassion into acts of transformative justice in our church and in our world. So we look forward to that. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Dr. Speller, Dr. Simmons. What a rich, truly rich and inspiring conversation. It's truly enlivening and really important. The emphasis particularly on compassion and radical compassion, the spirit of Ubuntu, and then the impact and importance of Franklinton Center at Bricks. This really has been such a rich discussion, and I cannot wait until next week for the final conversation. I don't know, you all may have to reprise this at a later time because it really is, when we talk about something being needed for such a time as this really has been an important remembering for the benefit of enlivening hope within us today, to continue the work of radical compassion in the spirit of Ubuntu, and not only resting on the legacy of Franklinton Center at Bricks, but also building upon that for a new generation. Thank you again. And reminder to everyone that they will continue this conversation next week, and Mother Duck will be back with us for that one as well. Thank you all for joining us on this edition of Nurture the Soul. It has been a gift to us today. We also look forward to a special offering on Monday, February 24th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in our What's Next series. What's Next? Disarming Leviathan, How We've Become Entangled in the Worship of Nationalism and Political Power. This series began prior to the 2024 election and will continue throughout 2025 as a special offering designed to help educate and support the big questions for our faith. The series is specifically curated to push back on political ideology and the political divide that has become this nation's religion. Again, timely conversation that is needed at this time. And as we conclude, I'm going to invite Dr. Henry Simmons to please offer a benediction for us today.
Thank you, Cheryl. And as a parting blessing for us, I'd like for us to ponder the words of the third verse of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Let us pray. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep our feet forever in thy path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, and lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to thee and true to our native land. Let us go in peace, knowing that God is with us. especially for such a time as this. Amen.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.